They were 900, each shadow a predator, each roar a harbinger of death. In Yakutia, where ice sculpts the soul and cold is a sentence, Elder Baya felt the earth tremble, not from an earthquake, but from the hungry fury of a snow leopard horde, a force never before seen. The 900 beasts descended from the mountains, eyes gleaming in the Arctic darkness, targeting his village's only hope of survival, the vast reindeer herd. With joints frozen by chronic pain and age weighing on his bones, Bayar knew that fleeing was not an option. The fate of his people, of his grandchildren, hung by a thread of ice, and he, the last guardian of ancestral wisdom, was the only barrier between life and annihilation. Bayar, despite the searing pain in his knees and hips, which felt like ice and shattered glass, raised his head. His eyes, though clouded by age, still carried the flame of 1,000 winters. He could not flee, not with the village, the only home his people had ever known, so vulnerable. The image of his granddaughter Anya, just 7 years old, with her bright eyes and melodious laughter, danced in his mind. She and the other little ones, the future of Yakutia, depended on him. A heavy sigh escaped his cold-chapped lips, forming a small cloud of vapor in the frigid air. He turned, the crisp snow crunching under his reindeer hide boots, and began to walk towards the heart of the village. Each step was a battle, a sharp pang that made him clench his teeth, but his determination was stronger than the pain. As he approached, he could hear the growing murmur of panic. People were emerging from their yurts, their faces pale and marked by fear, their eyes fixed on the mountains from which the leopard horde descended like a living avalanche. "Bayar!" Narina's voice, the village healer, cut through the air. Her large, worried eyes met his. "What will we do? There are so many, we've never seen anything like this." Beside her, the young hunter Alden gripped the shaft of his spear, his knuckles white with tension. He was strong, but the sight of 900 predators was too much for anyone. Baya raised a hand, a slow, calm gesture that by itself already brought a thread of hope. "We will not panic," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, echoing in the silence that had formed. "Not now, not when we most need clarity." He looked at each face, seeking the eyes of his brothers and sisters by blood and spirit. "Our ancestors taught us to read the snow, to listen to the wind, to respect nature's fury. They gave us the wisdom to survive the impossible." His eyes met Anya's, who clung to her mother's skirt, her eyes wide with fear. Bayar offered a faint but comforting smile. That smile was a silent promise that he would do whatever it took. He knew that panic was an enemy as dangerous as the leopards. Unity and faith in ancient wisdom were their only weapons. "We need a plan," Bayar continued, his voice gaining strength. "A plan that uses nature itself against them." He gestured towards the mountains and canyons that snaked around the village. "I know a path, a labyrinth of ice and stone, where the predators can be guided. But we will need courage from each and every one of you." He extended his hand to Alden, who promptly clasped it, feeling the elder's unwavering strength. Narina nodded, her eyes welling up, but now with a new determination. Despite the pain that consumed him, Bayar felt a warmth spread in his chest. It was love for his people, the responsibility that drove him. He was not just an elder, he was the living link to the past, the guardian of a legacy that could not be broken. He turned towards his yurt, where his bow and arrows, relics of generations of hunters, and his shamanic drum, an instrument of power and connection, awaited him. The mission was impossible, but the resilience of his spirit was infinite. He would save the reindeer, save his village, or die trying. Bayar pushed open the heavy reindeer hide door of his yurt, the warm, smoky air inside, offering brief respite from the biting cold. The flickering light of a seal oil lamp danced on the walls, illuminating artifacts from generations. His eyes swept the interior, landing on the corner where his birch bow rested. Beside it, a quiver of arrows and the shamanic drum, its hide surface taut and ready. Each movement was a painful effort. He knelt, his knees creaking. His wrinkled but steady fingers picked up the bow. The wood was smooth and cold, but its familiarity brought comfort. It was a link to the ancestors. He tested the string, feeling the perfect tension. Next, he picked up the drum. The hide was cold, but he knew that soon warmth and rhythm would make it resonate. The drum was not for hunting, but for guidance, to confuse and disorient, the voice of the ancestors. His hands trembled slightly. Could he, frail as he was, face 900 beasts? Narina's voice called to him from outside the yurt. "Bayar, are you all right?" Her concern was palpable. He knew Narina and Alden were waiting, sharing the same fear. He emerged, bow in one hand and drum in the other. Narina and Alden awaited him. "I am ready," Bayar said, his voice stronger with purpose. "Alden, I need you to gather the young ones, to guide the reindeer. We need to move them to the South Valley, where there are narrow passages and treacherous ice." Alden, though still apprehensive, nodded firmly. "Yes, Bayar, we will do as you command." His eyes now shone with a spark of hope, ignited by the elder's determination. Narina approached, her eyes fixed on Bayar's. "And you, Bayar, will you go alone?" Her voice was a whisper, mixing apprehension and admiration. Bayar smiled, a tired but warm smile. "I am not alone, Narina. Ancestors walk with me. Their wisdom is my weapon." He looked at the dark mountains where the leopards were a hungry river. The air carried a wild scent and growls. "My plan is simple," he explained, focused. "I will lure them into the labyrinth of canyons. There, the drum and the terrain will do the rest. They are many, but panic and disorientation will be their enemies." He knew the risk was immense. One false step, the end. Anya and his people, his shield. He stepped forward, towards the mountains, with drum and bow. Narina and Alden watched him, with fear and reverence. The village felt the weight, the fragile hope that Bayar carried. The pain in his joints was a reminder of fragility, but his spirit, a beacon for the confrontation. He was the guardian of Yakutia. Bayar took the first step, the soft snow yielding under his boots. The icy air whipped his face, but he barely felt the external cold. So intense was the battle within him. Every joint screamed in protest, a symphony of pain that threatened to bring him down. He pressed the shamanic drum against his chest, feeling the faint warmth of his own skin through the wood and leather. It was a fragile but real warmth, a reminder that life still pulsed within him. Behind him, the village looked like a small, vulnerable dot in the white vastness, the lights of the yurts flickering like tiny stars. He did not turn back. He could not. The weight of Narina's and Alden's gazes, and everyone else's, was a sacred burden that propelled him forward. The walk was slow, a test of endurance with every meter. The wind howled, bringing with it the metallic scent of snow, and now a wild, pungent odor that Bayar recognized with a shiver. The leopards. They were close. His eyes, accustomed to the Arctic gloom, swept the terrain. Searching for shadows, moving among the rocks and frozen bushes, he imagined the hungry eyes, the sharp claws, the silent brutality of 900 predators. A wave of despair threatened to engulf him, but he repelled it with the strength of 1,000 ancestors he felt in his veins. Meanwhile, back in the village, Alden acted with renewed energy, though his heart was still tight with apprehension. He gathered the strongest young people, their faces a mix of fear and incipient courage. "Bayar trusts us," Alden said, his voice grave, trying to convey the confidence the elder had awakened in him. "We need to move the reindeer to the South Valley," as he instructed, quickly and silently. The young people nodded, their eyes fixed on the mountains, where Bayar's silhouette was already becoming indistinct, swallowed by the immensity. Narina watched from afar, her hands joined in silent prayer, her lips moving in ancient invocations. A solitary tear ran down her wind-marked face, but it was not just of sadness. It was also of deep admiration for the elder's unwavering strength. Bayar continued, his heart rate now accelerated. Not just from pain, but from adrenaline. He felt the presence of the leopards as a pressure in the air, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The landscape began to change, open plains giving way to steeper rock formations and the first canyons, natural labyrinths sculpted by ice and time. It was there that his plan would begin. A low, guttural growl echoed from a crevice to his right. Bayar stopped, his body tense, his bow already in position, a bone-tipped arrow between his fingers. His vision was blurry, but he could discern a pair of amber eyes gleaming in the darkness. A leopard, the scout perhaps, or just one of the many already approaching. He felt the intense cold of solitude, the vulnerability of a man against a force of nature. But then, the image of Anya, laughing and playing in the snow, returned to his mind, a warmth that enveloped him. He was not alone. He was the hope of his people. With a deep sigh, Bayar raised the shamanic drum. His wrinkled fingers touched the cold hide, preparing for the first beat, the first note of an ancestral melody that would challenge the fury of the beasts. The battle was about to begin, a colossal challenge. Bayar raised his arm, the dull thud of the drum resonating in the icy air, breaking the oppressive silence of the Arctic night. The sound, deep and profound, vibrated through the stretched hide, echoing off the rocky canyon walls. It was not a sound of war, but of invocation, a call to the spirits of earth and ice. The leopard in front of him, ready to attack, recoiled, amber eyes blinking in confusion. The sound was strange, disorienting, not belonging to its hunting world. Bayar felt hope. The wisdom of the ancients worked. He struck again, a slow, steady rhythm, each beat sending sound waves that seemed to penetrate the very ice. More growls emerged from the shadows, and then other dark forms appeared, their eyes glowing like embers. The horde revealed itself, overwhelming, hundreds of pairs of hungry eyes fixed on him, the only point of warmth and life in a sea of predation. The pain in his knees intensified, but he used it as fuel, transforming it into rhythm and determination. Far away in the village, Aldan and the young people worked feverishly. The South Valley was a labyrinth of narrow passages, covered by ice that creaked under the weight of the reindeer. "Slowly, carefully," Aldan whispered, guiding the animals with firm gestures. The reindeer, sensing the tension, moved with silent urgency. The young people, despite their fear, followed the instructions, their hearts beating to the rhythm of the hope Bayar had ignited. Narina, in her yurt, lit sacred herbs, the smoke rising in spirals, a silent prayer. She felt the distant echo of Bayar's drum, the very voice of resilience. Bayar continued to beat the drum, moving backward, drawing the leopards deeper into the canyon. He did not run, for he knew that running would be his end. He walked with ancestral dignity, his eyes fixed on the predators, reading every movement. The leopards, for the most part, followed, curious and irritated by the unusual sound. Some growled, others tried to flank, but the constant rhythm and the strangeness of the sound seemed to keep them in confusion. He remembered his father's teachings. Fear is a weapon if you know how to use it against the enemy. With each step, the terrain became treacherous. Deep crevices opened in the rock, covered by snow, and unstable ice sheets formed dangerous bridges. Bayar knew every inch of that labyrinth, every natural trap. He guided the predators into these traps, using the sound of the drum to direct them, to make them hesitate in the right place, to push them towards danger. His mind was sharp, despite his debilitated body. The image of Anya, the promise of a future for his village, was the fire that burned in his spirit. A more audacious leopard leapt from a side rock, landing a few meters from Bayar. Its eyes gleamed with wild intelligence. Bayar did not retreat. He struck the drum harder, a faster, more frantic rhythm, and then, with a surprising movement for his age, raised his bow. The bone arrow, a gift from his grandfather, was ready. He did not aim to kill, but to startle, to reinforce the strangeness of the moment. The arrow whizzed, grazing the rock beside the leopard's head, which, startled by the sharp sound and proximity, recoiled with a yelp. The horde, for an instant, hesitated, confusion deepening. Bayar knew it was only the beginning, but the first victory, however small, was his. Hope, fragile as the ice beneath his feet, still lived. Hope, fragile as the ice beneath his feet, still lived. Bayar gave no quarter. The drum, which had previously beaten at a constant rhythm, now sped up and slowed down, an erratic pulse that seemed to confuse the predators even further. He moved with calculated slowness, guiding the horde to a section of the canyon where the ice became a web of deep cracks, almost invisible under the freshly fallen snow. His eyes, which had seen countless winters, read every nuance of the terrain, every shadow, every breath of wind that could reveal a trap or a safe path. The pain in his knees was a constant, an icy fire that burned, but the urgency of his mission transformed the agony into a strange, driving force. The leopards, though disoriented, were not stupid. Some of the more experienced ones began to growl with a new fury, their hunting instincts overcoming the initial confusion. They tried to flank Bayar, sliding along the rocky walls with frightening agility. A group split off, trying to cut off his escape path. Bayar felt the imminent danger, the air vibrating with tension. He changed the drum's rhythm again, a sharp, penetrating sound that echoed like an eagle's cry in the mountains, causing some leopards to stop, ears perked up, searching for the origin of that disturbing sound. It was the sound of nature, but distorted, used against them. Meanwhile, in the South Valley, Alden and the young people worked under the pale moonlight. The reindeer, with their wide hooves, slid dangerously over the thin ice that covered the passages. "Watch out for the crevice there," Alden warned, pointing to a dark opening that stretched beneath a layer of snow. Fear was still present, but Alden's calm leadership, inspired by Bayar, maintained order. They pushed and guided the reindeer one by one to the relative safety of the narrower passages, where the leopards would have difficulty maneuvering. In her yurt, Narina, with her eyes closed, felt Bayar's struggle. She visualized the elder, not as a frail man, but as a pillar of light, his ancestral wisdom weaving an invisible barrier against the darkness. Bayar reached a crucial point, a natural ice bridge that stretched over a deep abyss. He knew the ice was treacherous, capable of giving way under great weight. With a quick movement, he threw a small stone onto the bridge, the hollow, cracking sound confirming its fragility. The leopards approached, their growls now more audible, their patience wearing thin. Bayar raised the drum once more, but this time, instead of striking it, he spun it in the air, creating a low, continuous hum, like the wind in a cave. The hypnotic sound, combined with the dangerous terrain, caused the nearest predators to hesitate, their eyes fixed on the elder and the unstable bridge. A leopard, larger and more aggressive than the others, advanced, ignoring the sound and the danger. Bayar waited. At the exact moment the beast stepped onto the bridge, Bayar struck the drum with surprising force, a single, powerful thud that resonated like thunder. The sound, amplified by the canyon's acoustics, was accompanied by a frightening crack of the ice. The leopard, caught by surprise and off balance, slipped. It did not fall into the abyss, but stumbled backward, terrified by the sound and the sudden instability. The horde, seeing their leader's reaction, stopped. Bayar knew he had only a few seconds. He needed to push them into the trap, into confusion, away from his people. The true battle of cunning and resilience was just beginning. The true battle of cunning and resilience was just beginning. The thud of Bayar's drum, which had made the lead leopard stumble backward, echoed through the icy canyon walls. But the horde's pause was brief. Instead of retreating in panic, the predators, after a moment of confusion, began to regroup. Bayar watched with a pang of apprehension. The amber eyes, which had previously seemed disoriented, now gleamed with a cold, calculating intelligence. The horde was not an irrational mass. There was a hierarchy, a collective cunning he had underestimated. A large male with a scar over one eye, who appeared to be the true leader, growled, and several smaller leopards moved in response, no longer following the path Bayar indicated, but seeking alternative routes along the rocky slopes. The pain in Bayar's joints intensified, a cruel reminder of his mortality. He felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. That group of leopards, now more organized, was heading for a side passage he had avoided, a dangerous shortcut that led directly to the grazing lands of the South Valley, where Alden and the young people were trying to guide the reindeer. If they reached there, all his effort would be in vain. Bayar's plan to guide the horde into the main labyrinth was at risk. Far away, in the South Valley, Alden felt a change in the air. The distant sound of Bayar's drum, which had previously been a constant rhythm, now seemed more frantic, intermittent. The growls, previously muffled, seemed closer, more urgent. He looked at the young people, their faces reflecting the same growing fear. "Quickly," he whispered, his voice tense. "We need to pick up the pace. They are approaching." The reindeer, sensing the urgency, hurried. But the thin ice and deep crevices made every movement a risk. A young reindeer slipped, its thin legs flailing in the air, before Alden and another young person pulled it back to safety. Narina, in her yurt, felt her heart clench. She knew Bayar was facing something beyond what was expected, a challenge that tested the limits of his wisdom. Bayar gritted his teeth. He could not allow that group of leopards to reach the reindeer. He needed to intercept them, divert them again, even if it meant exposing himself to even greater danger. With a sigh that seemed to tear his chest, he changed direction, abandoning the planned path and heading for the side passage, an even steeper and more treacherous stretch where the ice clung to the rock at impossible angles. He knew he was putting himself in a situation of extreme risk, but the image of Anya, the future of his people, was a shield against fear. He raised the drum, but this time, instead of a disorienting rhythm, he struck a different sound, a sharp, challenging call, a sound he hoped would draw the attention of the more cunning leopards to him and away from the reindeer's path. His wrinkled fingers ached, but he did not stop. He was the guardian, and if his body failed, his spirit would fight to the end. The climb was agonizing, every muscle protesting, but Bayar continued, his eyes fixed on the group of leopards already approaching the passage, a direct challenge to his will. He was alone, but his soul carried the strength of all his ancestors, an eternal beacon. Bayar continued to climb, each movement a silent torture. The ice under his boots creaked, threatening to give way at any moment, and the sharp rocks tore at his clothes. But he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the group of leopards that, drawn by his new and challenging drum rhythm, began to change direction. The large male with the scar over one eye, the cunning leader, stopped, raising his head. His amber eyes met Bayar's, a spark of recognition and wild fury passing between them. The growl that escaped his throat was a sound of challenge, not confusion. The horde, or at least its most dangerous part, was now focused on him and not on the reindeer's path. It was exactly what Bayar wanted, but the price was his own safety. He moved further into the side passage, an even tighter and more dangerous labyrinth, where the ice formed slippery ledges and hidden crevices. The air was thick with the scent of predators, and the sound of their padded paws on the snow and ice was a macabre drumbeat accompanying his own. The pain in his knees and hips was excruciating, but he transformed it into breath, into stronger beats on the drum. He could not fail. The image of Anya, her innocent smile, was the flame that kept him from collapsing. Down below in the South Valley, Aldan felt the air vibrate with the change in Baya's drum rhythm. It was a more urgent, more dangerous sound, and the leopard's growls seemed to have moved away from the reindeer somewhat, but now came from a different, steeper direction. "They're coming another way," Aldan exclaimed, his voice hoarse with alarm. "Bayar is diverting them. Quickly, we need to rush the reindeer into the narrower passages where they won't be able to reach us." The young people, with renewed fear, pushed the animals with desperate force, their hearts beating in unison with the imminent danger. Narina, in her yurt, felt the change in the drum's melody. The sound was no longer one of disorientation, but of direct confrontation, of an audacious challenge. A tear ran down her face, but it was not of despair, but of deep admiration for the elder's courage. She knew Baya was sacrificing himself, putting his life at risk to save everyone. Her prayers became more fervent, an invisible shield of hope and faith. Bayar, meanwhile, reached a small ice platform that jutted out over an abyss. It was a point of no return. The leopards were right behind him, the scar-eyed leader just meters away, growling and baring sharp teeth. Bayar raised the drum, not to strike it, but to use it as an improvised shield, while with his other hand he drew an arrow from his bow. He did not want to kill, but he needed one last act of disorientation. With a guttural cry, he launched the arrow not at the leopard, but at an unstable ice formation above the beast. The impact was precise. A block of ice broke loose, falling with a frightening crash between Bayar and the lead leopard. The sound and the unexpected fall of the ice made the leopard recoil sharply, its eyes wide with surprise. The horde behind it stopped, confusion returning to their wild faces. Bayar seized the moment. He spun on his heels, the pain in his joints almost bringing him down, and leaped into a narrow crevice that opened in the ice platform, a dangerous shortcut that only he, with his millennia-old knowledge of the terrain, would know how to use. He squeezed through the crevice, the ice scraping his back, as he heard the furious growls of the leopards, now trapped by the fallen ice barrier and the narrowness of the passage. He had succeeded. He had diverted the horde, but now he was in an even more dangerous place, alone, with the hungry horde right behind him. His resilience was the only thing, the last hope between him and the abyss. Bayar squeezed through the crevice, the rough ice scraping his back and shoulders, a sharp reminder of the passage's narrowness. The air inside was even colder, laden with the damp scent of ancient ice and the wild odor of the leopards growling furiously from outside. Each movement was an agony for his joints, which felt frozen and rusted, but he forced them, driven by a need that transcended physical pain. He could hear the predator's claws scratching the ice at the crevice's entrance, trying to force their way through, but the passage was too narrow for them. The sound was a macabre echo of his own vulnerability, but also of his cunning. He advanced slowly, groping in the near-total darkness of the crevice, feeling his way with his wrinkled hands. The light outside was just a distant sliver, and he knew that with every meter traversed, he was delving deeper into a labyrinth of ice and rock. The image of Anya, her smiling, lively face, was the beacon that guided him, a promise that his struggle was not in vain. He could not afford to give up. The life of his village depended on him. Meanwhile, in the South Valley, Eldon and the young people had managed to guide most of the reindeer into the narrower passages, where the ice was firmer and the natural protection of the rocks offered a temporary refuge. The leopard's growls, though still audible, seemed to have moved away, concentrated in Bayar's direction. A collective sigh of relief swept through the group, but the tension was still palpable. "He's doing it," Alden whispered, more to himself than to the others, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the mountains where Bayar faced the horde alone. The young people nodded, their faces pale, but with a spark of hope. They trusted the elder. Narina, in her yurt, felt the energy of Bayar's struggle like an electric current in her own body. The drum had fallen silent, but she felt the elder's presence, his unwavering determination. She continued her prayers, the smoke from the sacred herbs rising in spirals, a bridge between the earthly and spiritual worlds, asking for strength and protection for Bayar. Bayar finally emerged from the crevice into a small ice cave, a tight, damp space that opened into another canyon, even deeper and more winding. The air here was heavy, and the ground, covered by a thin layer of ice and snow, was treacherous. He could hear the leopards outside the crevice he had just left, their frustrated growls echoing. They wouldn't be able to pass. But Bayar knew they wouldn't give up. They would find another way, perhaps along the steep slopes above. He needed to be faster, smarter. The ice cave was an apparent dead end, with smooth, slippery walls. However, Bayar, with his ancestral wisdom, noticed an almost invisible crack in the ceiling, through which a sliver of pale light entered. It was a passage upwards, to the canyon's surface, but it would require a dangerous climb, almost impossible for a man in his condition. He looked up, the pain in his joints screaming in protest. It was the only way out. With a deep sigh, he put away the drum and bow, grabbing onto an ice ledge. His wrinkled fingers, though aching, found a surprising grip. He began to climb, each movement slow and deliberate, testing the ice before trusting his weight. With every inch he ascended, the pain increased, but Bayar's determination was even greater. He was an elder, yes, but he was also a warrior, a guardian of his people. He would not bend. The light above seemed like an invitation, a promise that hope was still possible, even in the darkest and coldest corners of Yakutia. He continued to climb. With every effort, every tense muscle, he felt the strength of his ancestors, the resilience of his people pulsing in his veins. He continued to climb with every effort, every tense muscle, feeling the strength of his ancestors, the resilience of his people pulsing in his veins. The ice cut his wrinkled hands, and the cold penetrated to his bones, but Bayar did not waver. His knees screamed, each bend and extension a torture, but the need to move forward was greater than any pain. He clung to every ledge, every tiny crack, with the precision of an experienced hunter, though his body was that of an elder. The pale light from the top seemed like a distant beacon, a promise of fresh air and a new horizon. He breathed deeply, the icy air burning his lungs, and pulled himself up inch by inch, his determination etched on his tired face. The vision of his village, safe and warm, was the invisible force that propelled him. Outside the narrow crevice, the leopards growled with growing fury. The large male with the scar over one eye, frustrated by the ice barrier and the impossibility of following Bayar, began to sniff the air, his eyes scanning the steep canyon walls. He would not give up easily. With a low, authoritative roar, he signaled to the horde. Instead of waiting, the more agile predators began to scale the rocky slopes, seeking an alternative path to bypass the crevice and reach the top. They moved with frightening grace, their claws finding purchase in tiny crevices, their flexible bodies contorting with ease. Bayar knew they wouldn't stay put. Their cunning was sharp. In the South Valley, Alden and the young people continued to guide the reindeer. Most of the herd was already safe in the narrower passages. Protected by the imposing rocks, the silence of Bayar's drum, after it had ceased, was almost more frightening than the pursuit. Alden felt temporary relief, but a pang of anxiety still gripped him. He looked at the dark mountains, imagining what Bayar was facing. "He's buying us time," Alden told the young people, his voice firm. "We need to use that time wisely. Keep moving the reindeer without stopping." The young people, exhausted but inspired by Bayar's courage, nodded, their eyes fixed on the task. In her yurt, Narina kept vigil. The silence of Bayar's drum was a sign that he had entered a critical phase of his journey, where discretion was vital. She felt the energy of the elder's struggle, an invisible current that connected her to him. The smoke from the sacred herbs rose in denser spirals, and her prayers became deeper, a constant murmur of faith and hope. She visualized Bayar not as a frail man, but as an indomitable spirit, his ancestral wisdom weaving a mantle of protection around him. The village depended on him, and she, in turn, depended on the strength of her prayers. With one last excruciating effort, Bayar finally reached the edge of the crevice. He dragged himself out, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, and rolled onto the canyon's surface. The fresh, biting air was a blessing, and the daylight, though pale, seemed dazzling after the darkness of the crevice. He knelt, gasping, feeling the ice beneath his wrinkled hands. The pain in his joints was unbearable, but he raised his head, his eyes scanning the vast, icy expanse. It was then that he saw, not far away on the opposite ridge of the canyon, the scar-eyed leopard and its more agile followers had already found another way. They were descending the slope, moving quickly with a new sense of purpose. The sight chilled Bayar's blood. The cunning of the predators was greater than he had imagined. They were regrouping, and the new path would lead them directly to the reindeer's route, bypassing the entire planned labyrinth. There was no time for rest. He needed to intercept them again, and this time the danger would be even greater, as they would be on more open terrain. With a sigh and new determination, Bayar stood up, his muscles protesting with every movement. He picked up the drum, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. It would not be a sound of disorientation, but a call, a direct challenge to draw the predators away from his people. The battle was far from over. Bayar stood up, his muscles protesting with every movement. He picked up the drum, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. It would not be a sound of disorientation, but a call, a direct challenge to draw the predators away from his people. He raised the drum, his eyes fixed on the group of leopards that descended the slope. He knew their cunning was a formidable adversary. The open terrain was a double-edged sword. It offered fewer hiding places, but also more room to maneuver if he was fast enough. With a sigh that seemed to tear the last vestige of air from his lungs, he began to beat the drum. The rhythm was different now, not the hypnotic hum, nor the disorienting thud. It was a strong, steady pulse, a call that resonated through the canyon, an audacious invitation to the chase. It was the sound of an elder defying the fury of nature. The scar-eyed leopard stopped abruptly on the slope, raising its head. Its amber eyes, previously focused on the reindeer's route, now turned to Bayar. The sound of the drum was unmistakable, a direct provocation. With a growl that seemed to tear the icy air, the large male changed direction, and the horde, like a wild tide, followed him. They abandoned the path to the reindeer, focusing their attention on the solitary elder. Bayar felt a shiver run down his spine, but also a bitter satisfaction. His plan had worked. He had become the bait. The chase began. Bayar, with his aching legs and exhausted body, began to run. It was not a fast run, but a determined march, his steps calculated to take advantage of every irregularity of the terrain. He headed for an area he knew well, a higher ice plateau, where the wind howled more fiercely and visibility was reduced by blowing snow. It was a dangerous place, but he hoped that the confusion of the wind and unstable terrain could give him an advantage. Each step was a battle against pain, each gust of icy air a reminder of his body's fragility. But the image of Anya, of Narina, of Alden, and of all the children of the village was a fire that burned in his chest, keeping him warm against the brutal cold and against the overwhelming fear. Down below, in the South Valley, Alden and the young people felt the change. The leopard's growls, which had previously seemed to approach, now receded, echoing in a different direction higher up the canyon. Baya's drum, though distant, was a constant and unmistakable rhythm of defiance. "He's drawing them away!" Alden exclaimed, his voice filled with a mix of relief and dread. "He's risking himself for us. Quickly, we need to get the reindeer to the refuge now. We cannot waste his sacrifice." The young people, with renewed energy from understanding the danger Bayar faced, pushed the reindeer with desperate urgency, their hearts beating at a frantic pace. They knew every second counted. In her yurt, Narina felt the shift in energy. Bayar's drum, which had previously seemed like a lament, was now a war cry, a direct challenge. She visualized the elder, no longer as a pillar of light but as a warrior, his indomitable spirit shining brighter than Yakutia's icy sun. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face, but they were tears of pride and unwavering faith. She intensified her prayers, her hands clasped, asking the ancestral spirits to guide and protect Bayar on his almost impossible mission. The fate of all rested in his hands. Bayar reached the plateau. The wind whipped snow into his face, blinding him for moments. The leopards were right behind, their dark, agile silhouettes moving swiftly through the snow. He knew he couldn't fight them directly. He needed one more distraction, something to disorient them enough for him to escape to an even safer place. He spotted a peculiar rock formation, covered by a thick layer of ice that jutted out over a deep crevice. It was an enormous risk, but it was his only chance. With one last effort, he drew an arrow from his bow, aiming not at the leopards, but at the base of the ice formation. He needed to be precise and quick. The life of his village was at stake, hanging by a very thin thread. Bayar raised his bow, his wrinkled fingers trembling slightly with the effort and the excruciating pain that radiated from his shoulders and elbows. He took a deep breath, the icy air cutting his lungs, and held it. His eyes, despite his age, maintained the acuity of a hunter, fixed on the exact spot at the base of the ice formation. It was a precision shot, a desperate gamble. With one last effort of his indomitable will, he released the string. The arrow hissed in the frigid air, a dark line against the white of the snow, and hit its target with a dry, resonant thud. The impact was immediate and devastating. The ice formation, already weakened by the action of wind and time, shuddered, fine cracks spreading like spiderwebs. For an instant, the tense silence was broken only by the howling wind. Then, with a deep, thunderous groan that made the very ground tremble, the immense mass of ice began to give way. Slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, it detached from the rock, collapsing over the deep crevice with a deafening roar. A cloud of snow and ice shards exploded upwards, engulfing sight and sound for a few seconds. When the icy dust began to settle, the scene was one of chaos. The mass of ice had created an insurmountable barrier, and the crevice, now wider and more treacherous, revealed dark abysses. Some of the leopards, those closest to the formation, were caught by surprise. Their roars of fury and confusion mingled with the sounds of the fall. Some slipped on the unstable edges of the freshly broken ice, falling into the dark depths of the crevice, their wild cries lost in the abyss's echo. The large male with the scar over one eye, who was a little further back, stopped abruptly. Its amber eyes, previously full of fury and determination, now showed a mix of shock and frustration. It growled, no longer a challenge, but a wild lament, as the horde behind it dispersed in panic, some retreating, others trying to find a safe path along the plateau's edges. Bayar, exhausted, fell to his knees. The pain in his joints was unbearable, but a faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared on his chapped lips. He had succeeded. The natural trap, the one his ancestors had spoken of in legends, had been activated. Down below, in the South Valley, Alden and the young people felt the tremor of the earth and heard the massive crash that echoed through the mountains. The cloud of snow rising from the plateau was visible even from a distance. An apprehensive silence hung over them, broken only by the murmur of the reindeer. "What was that?" one of the young people asked, his voice trembling. Alden, his eyes fixed on the mountain, felt a lump in his throat. He knew. He knew Bayar had done something grand, something that might have cost him everything. "He did it," Alden whispered, warm tears streaming down his frozen face. He stopped them. "Now run! Take the reindeer to the final refuge. There's no time to lose." The young people, with a mix of relief and dread, redoubled their efforts, pushing the herd with desperate urgency. In her yurt, Narina felt the earth tremble and the air vibrate with a powerful and almost mystical energy. The sound of Bayar's drum had ceased, but in its place, she felt a wave of triumph and, at the same time, deep exhaustion. She knew the climax of the battle had arrived. Her prayers became a silent chant, a melody of gratitude and hope, as she visualized Bayar no longer in danger, but enveloped in a protective light. She knew he had fulfilled his promise. Bayar, still kneeling, watched the remaining leopards retreat, confused and disoriented. Most had been repelled or had fallen into the abysses. The immediate threat to the herd had been neutralized, but he was still alone on the icy plateau, exhausted, wounded, and the brutal cold began to seep into his bones in a more dangerous way now that the adrenaline subsided. He needed to find a way back, needed to reach his village, his family. With a groan, he tried to stand, but his legs did not respond immediately. The ordeal had taken its final toll. He could not fail now. The vision of Anya, her smile, was the only thing that kept him conscious, the promise of a future he had fought to save. He was the guardian, and his journey was not yet over. Bayar, with a muffled groan, tried again. His trembling arms held the residual strength of decades of hunting, but his legs refused to obey. Every muscle screamed, a symphony of pain that threatened to engulf him. The cold, previously external, had settled deep in his bones, sapping his energy. He dragged himself, using his elbows and shoulders, leaving a trail in the snow. The vision of Anya, her smile, was the only flame against the darkness. He could not give up. The village needed him, not just as a hero, but as the elder returning home. In the South Valley, Alden's urgency echoed among the young people. They had guided the herd to the final refuge, a spacious cave. The silence of Bayar's drum after the crash was an omen. "He's hurt," Alden said, his voice choked. "We can't leave him. He saved us. Now it's our turn." The young people, despite their exhaustion, nodded. Leaving the younger ones with the reindeer, Aldan and 3 strong hunters climbed the slopes, their eyes scanning the landscape for the elder. Narina, in her yurt, felt the change. Bayar's exhaustion was palpable, but also a faint spark of life. She knew he was in danger, but alive. She closed her eyes, concentrating energy on her prayers, visualizing a path of light for those who sought him. Her faith was the compass that would guide Alden and the others. Bayar, with superhuman effort, managed to turn onto his stomach and crawl. Every inch was a victory. He remembered his grandparents' stories. Resilience was not just physical strength, but finding a purpose greater than pain. He was the link between past and future, and that propelled him. He spotted a small rocky outcrop, minimal shelter from the wind. His goal to reach it, one small step. Alden and the hunters climbed quickly. Bayar's trail in the snow, faint and irregular, was difficult to follow, but they persevered. A young man with sharp eyesight spotted him first. "There, near that rock," he shouted. Alden felt overwhelming relief, mixed with the pain of seeing the elder so frail. They ran, slipping, until they reached him. "Bayar!" Alden knelt, his eyes teary. The elder was pale, his lips chapped, but his eyes opened, a gleam of recognition and gratitude. "Alden, the reindeer." he whispered, his voice faint. "Saved, Bayar, all saved, thanks to you," Alden replied, holding the wrinkled hand. The hunters, with careful gestures, helped him to his feet, supporting him. The journey back would be difficult, but he would not be alone. With Bayar supported between two hunters, they began the slow, painful descent. The elder's pain was evident, but the presence of his young people, proof of his sacrifice, was a balm for his soul. The pale light of the setting sun painted the mountains, celebrating life's victory. The village, now safe, awaited its guardian. Human connection, altruism, and triumph had prevailed over the icy fury. Bayar, frail but with an indomitable spirit, was returning home, carried not only by the arms of his young people, but by the love and gratitude of his entire village. The main conflict was resolved, and the promise of a future, though challenging, was real. Bayar's descent, supported by the young hunters, was a silent testament to his victory and his people's love. Each step of the young men was careful, protecting the frail elder, whose eyes, though tired, shone with a newfound peace. The sun, now almost on the horizon, painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the icy landscape. It was a scene of serene beauty, contrasting with the fury Bayar had faced and overcome. He felt the pain in every joint, a constant reminder of the ordeal, but the warmth of Alden's and the others' hands on his arms was a balm. He was no longer alone. In the valley, news of the reindeer's salvation and Bayar's return had already spread like a whisper on the wind. Narina, in her yurt, felt her husband's approach. The exhaustion that had previously oppressed her gave way to a wave of relief and gratitude. She stepped out, her hurried steps in the snow, her heart pounding in her chest. The village children, including little Anya, ran outside, their faces lit up with hope. The other villagers, with expressions of reverence and joy, formed a path, awaiting their hero's return. When Bayar appeared at the village entrance, supported by the hunters, a collective cry of emotion and relief echoed. Narina ran to him, her eyes welling up. She touched his wrinkled face, feeling the cold and the roughness of his skin, but also the life pulsing beneath. "My Bayar," she whispered, her voice choked, embracing him tenderly. He returned the embrace with the little strength he had left, feeling the familiar warmth of his wife. Anya, with her small arms, wrapped around her grandfather's legs, her pure smile melting the ice in his heart. The villagers surrounded him, not with noise, but with a respectful silence and looks of deep admiration. They knew what he had done, the sacrifice he had offered. Bayar, the frailest elder, had become the strongest pillar of their community. He was carried to his yurt, where Narina tended to his wounds and pains with herbs and massages, while the young hunters brought the reindeer, now safe and calm, to the village shelters. In the days that followed, Bayar recovered slowly. The pain persisted, but the peace in his heart was greater. He spent hours in the yurt, watching Anya play, listening to the children's laughter, feeling the life he had saved. The reindeer herd, the heart of the village, was intact, grazing peacefully. The threat of the leopards had been repelled, and life, in its purest and most resilient form, continued. Bayar's story spread, not just as a tale of bravery, but as a living legend of Yakutia. He had proven that true strength lies not only in youth or physical robustness, but in the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime, in a deep connection to the land and its ancestors, and in the indomitable will to protect those we love. His action inspired everyone, reminding them that, even in the face of the most daunting challenges, the resilience of the human spirit, altruism, and unity can overcome any icy fury. The village would prosper, not only through the survival of the reindeer, but through a renewed faith in themselves and in the wisdom passed down from generation to generation. Bayar, the guardian, had fulfilled his mission, and life in the icy immensity of Yakutia would flourish again. The months that followed the great blizzard and the confrontation with the leopards brought a new season of challenges, but also a deep peace to the village. Bayar, though still feeling the chronic pains in his joints, found a new rhythm. He was no longer the agile hunter of old, but his mind remained a treasure of wisdom. He spent his mornings in the yurt, watching Anya play with pieces of wood and furs, her laughter filling the air with a melody Bayar held in his heart. His eyes, once fixed on the icy vastness in search of danger, now lingered on the details of the life he had saved. Narina cared for him with silent devotion, her wrinkled hands preparing herbal teas and massaging his tired limbs. She knew that true healing came not just from plants, but from the soul. Her gaze, tender and understanding, was a mirror of the inner strength Bayar had always admired. Together, they shared stories at night, remembering the ancestors, the legends that now included Bayar himself. Her presence was a safe harbor, a constant reminder that even in the greatest trials, love and human connection were the true refuge. Alden, in turn, had matured. The young hunter who had once sought Bayar's approval now led with a quiet confidence, forged in crisis. He consulted the elder frequently, not out of indecision, but out of respect for his experience. Bayar's lessons on terrain, animals and patience had taken deep root in him. Aldan organized the patrols, ensuring that the reindeer, now more numerous and robust, were safe. The herd, a symbol of the village's survival, prospered, and each animal was a testament to Bayar's courage. The entire village felt the change. The fear of annihilation had been replaced by a stronger unity. Families worked together, sharing resources and stories. Children listened to Bayar's tales with wide eyes, learning that true strength lay not in muscles, but in cunning, resilience, and love for their people. The story of the 900 snow leopards, once a nightmare, was now an inspiring legend, a reminder that, even in the face of the impossible, the human spirit could prevail. Bayar, sitting at the entrance of his yurt, felt the icy wind on his face, but not the cold of before. It was a wind that carried memories, but also the promise of a future. He saw Anya running in the snow, Alden leading the hunters, Narina weaving furs with a smile. Life continued, and he had been the guardian of that continuity. He had proven that ancestral wisdom was not just an echo of the past, but a living tool for the present and the future. The icy immensity of Yakutia remained, with its extreme temperatures and relentless challenges, but Bayar's village was no longer the same. They had faced the icy fury and emerged stronger, more united, more aware of their own resilience. Bayar, the frail elder who had refused to see his people perish, had become the beacon of hope, the personification of the indomitable will to live. His legend would be told for generations, an eternal testament that true strength lies in human connection and an unbreakable spirit, capable of flourishing even in the heart of the harshest winter.